Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Creative Side Up. Thanks for joining us. My name is Tim Olsen, and this is the show where we unpack creative minds. This week my guest is writer and director Frank Sommers. We're on.
All right. Hey.
This is how it really is.
This is how it happens.
This is exciting. Frank Sommers. Are we going by Frank Sommers? Is that
Frank Sommers? Yeah.
Okay. There's always because there's two Franks. There's always been two Franks in my life.
Okay.
There's been the Frank G. Caruso,
Yeah.
and then there's been Frank Sommers.
Yes.
And that's how I was introduced to you.
Yeah.
Was from your first film that you did, Going Great White.
Well, I do go by Frank X. Sommers in credits and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what I was asking. Are we?
Yeah. Frank and I, we were Frank and Frank. We made a movie two movies together.
Yeah.
And we did say, well, as Frank and Frank, which name comes first? And I think we did paper, rock, scissors or something like that. So
not rock, paper, scissors, paper, rock, scissors. It's
Yeah.
a different version.
There we go.
You're both are backwards. And
Frank did win, and it made sense anyway because alphabetically.
Yeah.
So every time we were Frank and Frank, it really was Frank G. Caruso,
Yeah.
Frank X.
that's so funny. I never knew that.
Yeah.
Because I always just said Frank and Frank.
Yeah.
You know, and even still now, even when we were just talking, I had to say Caruso. I had to say,
Yeah.
by the last name, which is
Well,
always a weird crossover.
On the set, we would go by our last names because otherwise it'd get confusing really fast.
Yeah. So your interests, though, go further back than making your first independent film. You've been involved in theater. You've been involved in just the arts in general.
Sure.
How far back does that go? When did that start to come in?
It started really with illustration and drawing when I was young. I was kind of quickly, my sister Mary, props to her, taught me to draw when I was young. And I was pretty quickly the best artist in every school I was in. It was a nice point of differentiation when you're a kid. And then, even though I really had not had any music lessons or anything like that, I could play by ear. So in my head, I was starting to write music and songs
For fun.
For fun. And I was always a little bit pretty private about what I was creating. I started off, I don't know why. I in my head, I was gonna be like the next Walt Disney type thing, and then I got into drawing comic books. But I created my own line of characters that like 100 and something characters, and I would literally compare it to Disney and Marvel and say, in my head, that was going to be what I was.
Was that an idol
do.
of yours, Walt Disney? Was that someone you looked up to, or why the comparison?
Because I like the fact that he did all mediums, and in my adult life, even though it's not much of a famous career, I still to this day like the fact that I can be making movies, be writing theater, be making
Art.
comic strips, writing kids poetry, anything like
Yeah.
that. So it's always felt like that I wanted to be a multimedia type person in my creativity.
So at what point did you? What's the order of operations here? You go from drawing to music to
Drawing. People knew I drew, and then I was kind of getting into writing and creating comic book art, and then I was doing music that people know and really heard because I'm not much of a singer, and I'm not really much of a player. So I was writing music, but it was for other voices, and it took a while to have enough confidence to kind of start to show people that.
Is everything
as well.
self-taught?
Everything's pretty self-taught, and
why is that though? Like, where does that interest come from to try and learn all these different skills?
I think some of it's family of origin stuff. I'm from a family of 13 kids, and I think there wasn't the money, let alone necessarily the focus to say, hey, let's get him into these lessons or let's get him into this. So it just became this thing I kind of did on the side. And even though I think my family is supportive, there still was just like it just was one of these things I was kind of doing on my own, and so you're just like, I'm gonna learn. Now in the day of YouTube, the idea that you could just get online and teach yourself, it's infinitely more easier. But back then, I think whenever I'd sort of learn one skill, you'd see it would overlap into another. Lots of times, I really taught myself to learn and teach myself.
But specifically, you were focused on arts and entertainment. That was really kind of your...
That was always the deal.
Was it because that was your entertainment growing up, was making your own art, or...
No, it just felt like one thing about my childhood too. I think we were raised with the sense of purpose. We were raised
meaning
like,
what?
like go out in the world and do big things, whether it's social justice or whether it was in
Large
entertainment.
aspirations.
Large aspirations. We were raised kind of like we're going to go and take on the world kind of things. So I think that did two things that made me think like, oh, I'm going to be like the next Walt Disney. Or it also said, whatever you're creating, don't judge it against your local peers. Just look at it and say, how does that stack up against what's being done? So even I remember being like in high school, but thinking that I'm creating kind of like the next, I was comparing myself to Marvel and DC or whatever. I was
Big names.
Like I was looking at it and say, okay, my brand is going to be as big as that. Even though a lot of that was delusion and young delusion.
Well, it's interesting you say that because I think, are you trying to pull for, and I'm not putting this in a derogatory sense, but prying for attention because you're from such a large family. Did that ever have any play?
I don't think it did. It was, I wasn't, it was almost this private, secretive life of mine was my creative life. It was kind of.
But why are you So you're creating to learn. You're not creating to share what you're doing. If you're keeping
in
it
my
so
head,
private.
I thought when I'd become an adult.
Yeah.
This is again, my family was supportive, but I also think that was like my dad was very into sports, and that was an area that I think he understood what I was doing more. I think he didn't really understand the arts as much. Like I was in the plays and in high school plays and stuff, and he was always like, "Well, we'll let you do that." But he really, I think, it made more sense to him what I was doing in sports.
Right.
So I think it was just this part of my life that I thought, well, when I get to be an adult, I will start sharing it with the world. Mostly because I think I'd be better. You'll be better by then.
So at what point did you start sharing a little bit of what you're doing other than being in plays? In plays, you're in front of people.
Yeah.
And I've always known you to be a person who is very comfortable with being in front of people. And
I am, although I think like I was in the plays and I was actually for high school acting, I was pretty good. But I did think early on in my 20s, I started to like the idea of not being in front of the camera or not on stage, and it just felt more natural to start thinking in terms of being the person behind the scenes, behind the camera. I think just because a level of control. I remember even the idea of difference between live versus taping, both in music or in theater, versus film, or live music versus recorded. And I like the idea of when I'm doing it where I can control it, I can set the standards of it. Where if it's live, there's just too many things that can go wrong.
So as you're getting older, how do you balance between drawing, acting in a play, to music? How do you kind of balance that out and try to figure out what you're really good at rather than kind of spreading yourself too thin there?
Sure. Well, a lot of it is just honestly youthful delusion. You just don't even know better, so you just go, oh, I'll do
naive
this.
about it.
You're naive about it, and you don't know how the system works or anything like that. You don't know how the art of it works.
Or that there's a business behind it.
Or that there's a business behind it. You just kind of go, oh, I'm doing this now, or I'm doing this. And like even musical theater, I remember my dad had the idea, which still hasn't been done, but a Beetle Bailey musical, which is an old comic strip for those.
Yeah, you'll have to explain that. I'm not quite catching that.
Okay, do you not know the reference? It's still in the papers, it just shows how comic strips, they still exist in newspapers, although I think they're pretty much a dead art form.
Yeah.
At one point I had a whole.
I only know Garfield and Family Circus.
So I actually had a comic strip series I was going to push to the syndicates. And anyway, but Beetle Bailey was a comic strip that still exists today about this lazy guy in the army. And my dad was like, that should be a musical. So I wrote a whole musical when I was like, I think 19.
Wow.
It has some legitimate, but even then I thought, well, this is going to be something that's up there with Rodgers and Hammerstein or whoever.
At that time, you were thinking that.
I was thinking we're going to write the next great, like whatever I was doing, I thought this is going to be the next, if it was a comic strip, I was going to be the next, it wasn't Calvin and Hobbes then, but stuff like.
How come you have that mentality of anything you do? It's always, this is going to be the next. This is going to be, not that it's revolutionary, but that you're putting your best effort out there and trying to set the bar at a level that's extremely high. Why do you have that?
I think it's just family of origin stuff. I think that we were just raised with this idea that we were going to be like the next Kennedys or the next whatever. We were going to be a family that did extraordinary things, and my siblings do extraordinary things.
Yeah. And are you the only one in your family that's based in the arts?
I think mostly. I mean, I have a brother who plays guitar. I have a couple other people but most of them really don't do much in the arts or with music.
Yeah.
So,
but I mean, in terms of making it a life choice, a business.
Without a doubt, that.
Yeah.
And I think even most of them don't do much of other arts, be it drawing or music and that sort of thing. There's some dabbling. Yeah.
Now, at some point when you're getting older, maybe college level, you got to be, at least I have, movies are made in Hollywood, musical theaters in New York City. Are you ever thinking about going to any one of those is that ever like the end result? Like, I got to get there as soon as possible. Was that ever something that came up early?
It was. And that's my advice now to younger people, when they ask me, I say, if you want to do these things, get to New York or LA or Chicago at least.
Yeah.
Because I didn't do that. I had this big family that kind of anchored me. I grew up in the Detroit area. We moved to the Madison, Wisconsin area, and then it kind of anchored me here. And I think that's probably the part of my life that doesn't make the most sense at all, because it's hard to make a living in the arts, really, besides those three centers. I'm not saying nobody does, but it's pretty darn difficult.
Yeah.
So if you're going to have ambitious dreams of making it in any of the media or arts fields, go where it's done.
Where the industry is.
Where the industries are.
Yeah. Where the respective people who can potentially greenlight a project or invest in a project or take it seriously.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, A, it's a place. Those are the places you can actually make a living at it. B, those are the places that have the resources that they can greenlight a film or theater show or anything like that. And C, it's a big thing. It's just community. You're going to find the actual community of people who are doing that for a living, and you won't find that in other places.
So you're here and you're in this area, and you decide to make a movie.
That's pretty far late in the game. I'm about
That's
40
way down
when I
the
do
line.
that. Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, by the age 20, I think I want to make an independent film. And I'm actually, at the time when I started going to college, I remember Spike Lee had his first films out. In fact, he had a whole book about the making of.
And when we're saying films, we're talking about film.
Film. Yeah.
The actual art of shooting on film.
Yeah. Indie film is just starting to become a thing. Robert Rodriguez, Spike Lee, Michael Moore. And I remember at age 20, I started, I took film briefly as my major at UW. They didn't really have a filmmaking.
Major.
Yeah, like you were studying film
program.
as a academic enterprise. They didn't just say, here's a camera, we're going to make a film.
Was it more historic?
Some of it was historic. Some of it was just studying it as
Theory.
media theory.
Yeah.
So that was disappointing. But again, I was naive. No, I wanted hands-on. I actually wanted to, let's go make a film.
Right.
And I actually did a couple short little things that were shot in video that show just how green and how little I knew. But that's how you learn.
Yeah, by doing.
Yeah, by doing. And then I met my wife during college. We got married, started having kids, and that's what sort of goes, okay, that anchors you again. So the plan was kind of film, and all along I'm still doing some stuff with music, and I actually start writing country music in my 20s, mostly because the punning side of me and the rhyming side and the wordplay side. I remember I wrote my first country song just as a mental exercise, and it was a song called Since You Left, I Realize You're Right, and every single line had that kind of play on words. I just wrote it like I was doing a puzzle. And when I got done, I thought, that's actually not a bad country song. And I just started writing a lot more. So then in my mid-20s, I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to go and be a professional songwriter. And then I did start thinking, let's move to maybe Nashville, which is a center if you want to be a songwriter.
Definitely.
That's one of the places to go.
Definitely. Live music, there's undiscovered talent all over the place.
Yeah. So and then right at the time, Alan Jackson and Garth Brooks and Clint Black country was just starting to take off.
Friends in low places.
Yeah, and so my wife and I did pack up. We were going to go there. We were there for about 2 weeks, and it really wasn't our cup of tea. And we came back, and then I was like, okay. And I'd written by then a couple hundred country songs, and most of them, I don't want to say most of them, but there was a big chunk of them that I actually believe, if you got in the right hands, would be
How
actual
do you?
hits.
A lot of my questions are based on your focus, because you're all over the map. You're everywhere.
Yeah.
You're in live theater to now we're talking about writing music for artists, in a certain genre. how are you able to focus in on any one thing and say, all right, I'm going to spend the next few months of my life just focusing on writing country music, which seems like such a left field decision to make when really maybe your passion lies in making film or writing a play? Or why would you spend time to focus on the music thing? Is it because of the business that's driving it to potentially be a part of, or what's your play there?
It's a real great question, and I think it's a variety of things. One, sometimes it seems like, oh, I could make a living at doing this, and so it feels like that would be a sort of money-minded idea somewhere in there. Two,
and by the way, it's not an uncommon thing.
Sure.
People are buying and selling songs all the time.
No, without a doubt. In fact, and country music is one of the places to this day still that a lot of the hits are not written by the people who sing them. It's harder to do that in pop and other music forms, but in country, to this day, the songwriter sometimes is the king, especially back then. The songwriter was the guy who was creating the material we heard in the radio, not the singer.
So you had kind of become privy to that idea, or
that idea
how does something like that even come about? I don't. If you could explain a little bit more about that.
That's really been. I mean, if you could follow the history of songwriting in the 40s and 50s, the singer no one even thought of this singer as being the person who wrote their
personality.
Own songs. They were just in fact, the same hit song might be done by 10 people.
Yeah.
And you know different versions of that song, and then in the 60s is where we start to get the singer-songwriter, and that gets even deeper in the 70s. So then at that point, folk and rock, now we're expecting that the singer sings his own song. But that wasn't true in country at all. Even though people identified the singer with a song, the majority of Garth Brooks songs, he did it more than many of them, but the majority of many of the top country artists were singing songs that they didn't write at all.
Right.
And and there was a lot of money to be made for the people who were writing big hits.
And what was his pseudo, his alter ego? What was that? Chris
Gaines.
Gaines? Yeah.
So I want to get back to the focus of it.
Yeah, the focus. We're losing focus on the focus.
Well, for me, I understand that the world wants to chop up artists into not only tiny slices, but slivers.
That's right.
They say you are a movie maker, not only a movie maker, you write only thrillers, and that's all you do.
Well, I'm even doing that to you as I'm talking to you. I'm saying, why aren't you just a filmmaker? Why aren't you just a playwright? Why are you spending so much time writing country music? Why are you making you know what I mean? Like,
I do.
That's just the way that I guess we're pushed to look at the entertainment industry.
Yeah, we want to catalog and chop it up and say this person does this, and we're almost surprised, like, Adam Sandler, he could act serious. It's like, well, why can't he? And maybe he's a really great singer and a painter too.
Yeah.
But we don't want to necessarily, it's not that we don't want to. It's easier for us to catalog and chop up.
Well, even a lot of that, I can, going back in film history, a lot of that was controlled by the studios. They would tell the actors how to be outside in public. So that way there was a certain storyline that was followed and that they were able to portray a certain lifestyle.
Yeah.
But specifically to your story, the idea of not spreading yourself too thin, and I've said that more than once now, but it's not because I think that about you, but it's because I want for anyone listening to this to understand that it is possible, that there is an ability to kind of float among interests.
Well, I sometimes have said later in my life I try not to only dream big, I try to dream wide. So that encompasses a lot of different topics. But I think the other thing is it's sometimes driven by my limitations. And what I mean by that is if I could sing, and I've written tons of music now in my lifetime, but I'm not really much of a singer. And if I had been a singer, the temptation might have been to focus on myself as a performer. And when one focuses themselves on a performer, that's a very different thing than what I do. I write for other voices. I write for other characters. I write for other genres. It's freed me up to say, well, I can write country because I'm not even singing it. And I can write Broadway because I'm not even singing it. And so it allows me to just be this person behind the scenes.
How are you moving between those different areas in your brain? Like when you're writing for, let's say you're writing a screenplay and you're writing for a specific character. How are you, and then, the next day you're writing a song for a Broadway show. How are you able to maneuver to those different areas of your brain and make sure you're really giving it your all?
Well, a couple of things is for one thing, I think that it all feels of a whole. It feels like, I feel like I'm as much of a producer more than an artist. And what I mean by that is what drives me is the question, what is this supposed to be? not what do I want it to be or what's speaking to my soul. I feel like I'm a producer, and it's like I have this idea for a movie, or I have an idea for a show, or I have an idea for a song, and I don't look at it like, what do I want to say? This is neither good nor bad, but I think some people are coming at it from, they have something they want to say from their soul, and that's not how I operate. I see it as a form of entertainment, almost like a producer at a studio. It's just my own studio.
Yeah, you kind of have a business brain about it. There's a technical side of it.
A technical side. I'm not sure it's business. I think I'm mostly a commercial type.
But there's a lot of
creator.
artists who feel like they have to say something.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to create something if it's not saying something. And
Well, I think it's saying something, but it's not necessarily driven by
life experience.
my own life experience.
Yeah.
My daughter Olivia, props to her. She's an amazing songwriter and artist in her own right. But just over the holidays we were talking, and they know this about me, that she made some joke about the idea of Dad writes about almost everything except his own life.
Oh.
And that's actually somewhat true.
Yeah.
That it doesn't mean there's not things I want to say that find its way out there.
Yeah.
But it's not my art or my products don't necessarily come from, oh, that's Frank Sommers expressing himself. It's more like me going, that's a great idea, or that's a great piece of potential entertainment. And how do I always feel like I'm done when I've made it what it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
And then I can kind of go, okay, that's where I see it as.
Right. And we always talk about learning by doing, but at some point down the line, you have to not necessarily know how to do it, but you have to at least have a direction and know where you want to go with it. So whether it's a song you've written or a full-length film, at some point, and I've been on your film sets before.
You have been, yeah.
And I know it's a lot of trial and error stuff, but I also know you have a very distinct vision on what it's going to be the whole time. Even if you don't necessarily know the in-betweens, you know where it's got to get to.
I know where it's got to get to.
But I mean, not necessarily having the training or the background or the experience to be able to say, now we're going to make a film. You kind of pick up these pieces and know that they're going to be arranged and you're going to see the full mosaic at some point. But when you're in it, we're going, okay, this is fun. This is exciting. You know what I'm kind of getting at? Where it's kind of like,
but
I don't know how
yeah.
It's hard for me to understand how someone is able to just push forward on something like that. That's what you do.
Yeah.
At least that's how I perceive you to be.
Yeah. And I think you were instrumental in some of those early films. We did 2 feature-length films. One was called Going Great White that I wrote and directed with Frank G. Caruso, as well as Lake Jimmy. So we're discussing those. And Tim was a cameraman just still in high school. You just started helping out with...
I didn't know what I was doing.
You did.
Yeah.
But you very quickly learned, and you became one of our main camera people for Lake Jimmy.
Yeah.
Behind the scenes, if you were part of that process, you would have seen that I really was doing a lot of cerebral work and figuring out what does this need to be. So when we did Going Great White, which is back now, I think about 14, 15 years, I looked at, basically it was Best in Show meets Amway. And I looked at Best in Show, and I literally, at the time, now you could just find scripts online. I had to find, I think that one I actually transcribed myself.
It was a mockumentary.
It was a mockumentary.
Is this pre-Office?
Was Office, BBC Office was out, and I think that was it. American Office might have just been coming out.
Okay.
And I think I watched Best in Show, and I transcribed it myself.
Right.
And in doing so, I realized, oh, wait, it's not a movie. It's actually like 7 short films. And when I did that, I was like, oh, we can do that. We can actually do that. And so that allowed me to go, we're not copying. I mean, if you watch Going Great White, you know that there's another mockumentary in that style.
You're stripping it down to its template.
We're stripping it down to its template and realizing, oh, we can make this because we just have to shoot 7 short films. And we don't even, there needs to be a story arc, but it doesn't have to be that clear. Mm-hmm. We can just have a general story arc for each character. And that made me realize, oh, I can do this because I've broken it down to what it needs to be.
So you pulled it back and you were able to look at it from a different perspective.
Yeah.
Rather than taking on the daunting task of saying, I'm making a movie, you said, well, here's a movie that's successful that I really enjoy.
That I respect.
You respect. Let's kind of strip it back.
Yeah.
You transcribe it. And so you have a template and you say, and you're breaking it down in a sense, like you said, there's multiple storylines or kind of just these short films. And if we combine it, it takes up time on screen.
Yeah.
And before you know it, there's 90 minutes, not to make the process seem easy or anything.
No, it wasn't.
But mentally to you, it seemed tangible.
It seemed tangible because then at that point I can say, okay, I have 7 short films to shoot for each of these characters, and now we actually came up with 10 scenes for each storyline. And by the way, only I think maybe a half of those find their way into the movie. But then you just go, okay, is this scene? And then you can break down each scene and say, is that scene funny enough? Is that scene funny enough? We had a whole bit where we said, okay, what is humor? Because Frank and I just started working together, and that's a weird thing to write comedy with someone you don't even know that well.
Yeah.
We got to know each other really well during it.
Yeah.
But we said, how do we know what's funny? What's funny? And we actually took the show Seinfeld and we broke it down again and said, well, okay, we're going to say there's Seinfeldian humor, was Jerry is making kind of comments on this aspect. What's Ovaltine? Whatever. Just like, we have sort of Costanza type humor where he's sort of bringing this negative anger, awkwardness,
complaining
thing, and just finding himself into it's Larry David basically. And then we had Kramer, which was crazy, physical, silly stuff. So when we were writing Going Great White, we would actually look at a scene and say, do we have enough Costanza like in this scene? Do we have enough Seinfeld in there? Do we have enough Kramer? And if it didn't, we'd say, well, how do we add some physical humor? And how do we add some social commentary in there? So even though it seems like people might say, oh, that script works or it's funny, it didn't come from a place of not breaking it down. It came from a place of breaking it down and saying, how do we do this thing?
Look, that means there's constant collaboration. Because if you're writing and you guys had a premise for every scene and there were lines that need to be said, but a lot of that was play and a lot of that was collaboration between you and the other Frank, and a collaboration and a trust between you and your cast.
Well, first off, it was such a joy writing with Caruso, and we had such a fun time, and I know he's mentioned it in his podcast as well. But our general way of writing is, and even there was a good balance. I am a structuralist. I think in terms of making it make sense, breaking it down, giving it structure. At the time, I think especially Frank's brain is much more exploding with ideas and taking it in crazy directions. And our typical writing session was me. I saw it as playing catch, and I would throw in the ball, and he would throw it in a wild, crazy direction that I had to catch. Then put it back into something that made sense. And then he'd throw it another.
Reel it in. Yeah.
So that was a constant. And I think we learned a lot from each other. I think he learned sometimes a bit about structure, and I learned sometimes that structure can be overrated. Sometimes you just got to let it go into crazy places, and it'll be funnier and better because of that.
Hey everyone, just want to take a quick moment and let you know of a few ways you can help support the show. First, you can like this video and subscribe to our channel if you enjoy the content we're putting out. Share this episode with other creatives and help spread the word. Next, you can go to creativesideup.com. That'll take you over to our Ko-fi page where you have the ability to drop us a few bucks and help support independent creators like myself so we can bring you more episodes and feature even more creatives. Additionally, you can go to anchor.fm/Edgeline Studios and have access to everywhere the podcast is available. And if you'd like, you can tap the support button and become a supporter with a small monthly donation to help sustain future episodes. Finally, follow us on Instagram at CreativeSideUpPod. Join the conversation, send us a voice message. Share your story with us. We want to know, what do you do creatively and what inspires you to do it? Your message could be featured on an upcoming episode of Creative Side Up. So thank you for all your support, and now back to the show.
When we were making Lake Jimmy, the same way, we broke down. It always helps me to have a template or a touchstone. Doesn't mean we're going to copy it. Doesn't mean it's going to be the same. I don't want it to be the same when it's done. But it does say, well, what is this meant to be? How's this going to be? And Lake Jimmy, it's the story of two men in their 40s that were former foster brothers when they were in their teens, and they're on a road trip. So the movie it was the most was Sideways, Paul Giamatti.
However, it's more. This is your more traditional style of film. It's not a mockumentary. It's not made to have this perception of it looking like we're following real life. This is more in a traditional sense, the storyline.
Well, let me also say this. I picked mockumentary as my first film for a reason, which was I thought we could pull it off. And I thought we could pull it off because we had limited technical, that we didn't have the top-of-line cameras. You can get away with it in a documentary setting. And also, we shot like 100 hours and we got down to 100 really funny minutes. And because it's a mockumentary or documentary, your storyline isn't that tightly interlocked. You can just say if it's not funny, it's not in. And you can just make that the criteria. The funny stuff gets in. As long as it fits a basic story arc, it works. If you were making a mystery thriller, you need to have point A and G and L. Otherwise, it won't make sense. That's not true of a mockumentary at all. And the same with when we picked the second one, I knew I wanted to make it more dramatic and more of a serious film. But a road trip also doesn't follow the same rules. A road trip, if a scene doesn't work, you just cut it. You don't even know they stopped at that place.
Right.
So I knew we were early enough filmmakers that some scenes just weren't going to work, even if you did this homework.
Is that a matter of being clever at hiding some of your weaknesses on a technical level?
Yes.
Because as a road trip movie, we've seen plenty of road trip movies where there's montages, there's music happening, and we're seeing the characters in their moments without any dialogue. There's just music. It's like we're able to take some of those technical abilities that maybe we don't have the budget for, or we don't have the size of crew for, but we're able to kind of mask that underneath these clever ideas.
It gave us some looseness around the narrative and some room to fail, because I knew we were going to sometimes. I again want to say my standards, what I'm trying to do, are high, whether we hit it or not. I think that I'm always trying to make it. I don't want it to be in the movie unless it's good. But I also knew sometimes, because we're not amateurs, but we are low budget filmmakers working with people who are not trained actors, we're just going to have scenes that you go, well, we tried. And I wanted to have enough room to fail.
Right.
To still end up with a great product, or good product.
Did you feel like at the end of that experience?
I just want to finish this point.
Yeah, absolutely.
With Sideways, I'm a believer in saying, okay, how did they do what they did, and deconstructing it. And at the time, you could just do. Now, if you were doing it, you could just put the movie on and just do little screen captures. But at the time, I put it on, and I had I had a little digital camera, and every time the scene changed, I just clicked, and then I went through those pictures and said, okay, this is how they set up their cameras. It basically was a storyboard, and said, how did they do it? So if we were doing a two-person conversation, I might look and say, how did they do it? Okay, let's set up our cameras similar. Yeah. Because I want it to have some of that same feel. So I only bring up that story to other potential filmmakers, potential anything. I always think it makes sense to find something that you think is a pretty good benchmark.
A reference point.
And then break it down. How did they do that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of times that happens with, like for me, for example, I never understood cinematic lighting, even though I learned it expansively within film school. It wasn't until after film school that I started looking at films differently.
Yeah.
And I was able to understand, what that backlight was doing, or why there's a soft light here, or why we're able to see the light in the, like there were all these little intricate ideas that never really clicked in until much later. But going back to your story now, you're at the end of your second film that you've done, feature-length film. Do you feel like at that point, are you going to just keep making movies, or because you're somebody who kind of just goes in whatever direction you're inspired by, do you ever lose any of that, or do you say movies are it? I'm now made two.
I think if at some point the world said, hey, we're going to pay you a lot of money to do this, that would make that decision probably easier to say, I'm just going to do that. And I'm not even necessarily looking for that payday, but that would life has a way of forcing you sometimes to do that. Because in some sense, let's call it financial success didn't follow these things. Yeah. I'm glad in many ways it didn't, because it let me have the career I wanted to have, which is I kind of have done everything. People don't know my stuff, but I've written a novel, photography, filmmaking, and even filmmaking, hopping over from genres. We did a sitcom pilot.
Commercials.
I've written hundreds of songs in every genre.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it is up. I wrote a children's poetry book with my daughter Francesca. I think pretty amazing stuff. It's up there, I think, in quality.
Yeah.
in some ways, because life didn't say, hey, you're going to be doing this for as a paid living, it allowed me to just keep hopscotching.
So I take it you're not going to be stopping that anytime soon. That's how you kind of flow.
That's how I kind of flow.
Yeah.
And I usually have about 3 different kind of projects going into my head at one time.
Yeah. So I want to move to specifically a theatrical show that you've been working on for how many years now?
Well,
has this been in the works?
It's a musical based on the movie 1995 movie called Englishman Who Went Up a Hill But Came Down a Mountain. Starred Hugh Grant and Cole Meany. And it's the story of 2 British soldiers. It takes place in 1917 Wales. 2 British soldiers enter Wales, and they're making a map of Wales, and they come upon the first village that's very proud of their cherished mountain. And the map makers measure the mountain, find out it's not actually 1,000 feet, so it's not a mountain. It won't be going on their map. And the village is pretty outraged by that, and they sabotage the soldier's car, and they keep the older one drunk, and they have the local...
Should we have said spoilers?
Well, this is the premise. You'd see this in any trailer for the movie.
This is the trailer. No.
And so they basically keep the soldiers there while the villagers start lugging dirt up the hill to get the last 16 feet to make it a mountain.
Right. And so at what point did you say, let's take this movie idea and produce it into a musical, a Broadway musical?
Well, I'm going to jump back. So I was writing country music for a while. We went to Nashville, decided that's not what we want to do. We moved. We came back. We just were down there for about a 2-week trip, and we decided not to move. We came back to Wisconsin. And so then I was like, well, okay, I really like writing music. And where else should I go with this? And there was someone I knew who had just written a version of A Christmas Carol. And I think it's a good thing sometimes when you feel kind of an envy. I was like, I really was envious that they had done that. And I thought, oh, why am I feeling, because maybe I should be doing something like that. And initially, in a naive way, I thought, I'm going to send him a couple songs I have for A Christmas Carol. And then I was realizing, no, he's just not looking for that from me. But then I thought, well, I can write another version of A Christmas Carol. It's in the public domain. So that was my first musical. I wrote a version of A Christmas Carol. And then I really loved that it was just came to me like, yeah, this is something I really wanted to do. So then I just started writing.
Did you approach that as it's going to be a finished product, or was this more along the lines of, well, I have it in me to write this? Or
I always think it's going to be both a finished product and great, and that the world will love it. So
right, but
I'm not saying that's how it shakes out, but I always write that with that in mind.
And I mean, we should be transparent. It doesn't work out that way.
It doesn't work out that way.
You spend so much time either if you're writing a single song or you're writing a full length musical or a play or even sometimes a movie that you thought would have the festival acclaim that you were hoping for. Sometimes it doesn't work out.
Yeah.
And so you don't get defeated by any of that. You say, let's move on to the next one and let's just keep going because you enjoy doing it.
I enjoy doing it. I feel like it's what I'm kind of, lack of a better word, called to do. I feel like when I'm not creating and not creating on what I think is a high level, then I'm not doing kind of what I'm on earth to do.
Right.
In a non-religious way, but not in a not religious way too. I don't mean in a religious, but like that. Why are we here? That sort of that kind of question. I
sense
feel like
of self-worth.
Yeah.
So when A Christmas Carol doesn't, at some point it doesn't get made. It's not a show.
Well, that one I didn't push that much because I thought, well, I don't know. There were so many versions. That was just almost like a starter one. That was like, okay. And then I did one based on The Phantom Tollbooth, which is one of my favorite kids' books. I did one on The Princess Bride, and then I was writing simultaneously one on Sense and Sensibility and The Englishman Who Went Up a Hill Came Down a Mountain.
How does that come into play? How does Englishman come into?
Oh, in there too. I did one on a American Girl character, Addie, and a lot of it was I like not repeating myself, so I just started jumping genres. So it was really fun to write a gospel one. I was sort of writing a classical music operetta one with Sense and Sensibility. And I've been a fan of Celtic music much of my life. Grew up with some of that.
And keep in mind, Englishman, it's a movie, but not a musical. It's a
movie. There's a book that goes with it as well. And I had liked the movie a lot. And so when I thought of doing a Celtic type musical, I thought, oh, that's going to be a really good fit. And I have a funny story about. I was very excited about the Princess Bride version I had done of a musical. I think I wrote a tremendous musical version of it. Later on, when I got to know Stephen Schwartz a bit and Glenn Slater, it seems like almost everybody's got a Princess Bride version out there. It hasn't been done on Broadway yet, but almost everybody sees it as a great property. So it's funny, as I had tried to contact William Goldman, who wrote The Princess Bride, the book, and owned the rights. And
famous writer.
Yeah, this is a funny story. I will try to make it somewhat concise. So I had sent him a version of The Princess Bride. I had packaged it in this old leather brown book and pretended it was by S. Morgenstern, and those who know the original story of Princess Bride will get that reference. And we went back and forth, and he wasn't going to look at it. His lawyers were not having him look at it. And then I sort of put it in the back burner, and I was writing Sense and Sensibility and Englishman. I was finishing those up. And the DVD came out with of The Princess Bride, and it had William Goldman's director's commentary. So writer's commentary. So I was watching it, and I was thinking, wow, I really did a great version of this. I want to try to contact him.
He's got to know.
Well, yeah. And I thought, why give up on that? So at the time, they had all the phone books were available online. So I Googled the New York phone book, and in the New York phone book,
oh my God,
there were 12 William Goldmans. So I just thought, I'm going to start calling them.
Yeah.
So I start calling them, and like the fifth one.
Do you know what you're going to say, or are you just? Do you know even like?
Well, I know the basic.
Free, you're just pitching.
I'm pitching, yeah.
Yeah.
And he had heard who I was. His lawyers knew that there was a guy out there who had written a version.
There's a crazy guy out there trying to get a hold.
Yeah. So like the fifth one. The guy answers, and I say, "Oh, is this William Goldman who wrote Marathon Man and Butch Cassidy?" And and he says, "Yeah." And I tell him that I have this musical, and he says, "Great, send it to me." And I thought, "Wow, that's amazing." So I'm putting the package together. Now I had just listened to William Goldman speak for an hour and a half on the writer's commentary.
Yeah.
And in my head, I'm thinking, that guy didn't sound anything like the guy who talked on the phone.
I was just going to predict that. I was like, it can't be.
Yeah. So then I thought, well, I'm just going to call the remaining William Goldmans. And like
they all
two
said,
later, the guy answers and he says, hello. And I think, oh, this was the voice that I had heard on the commentary. This is the guy.
You're playing a little bit of the commentary.
Yeah.
You're listening on the phone, going back.
So we end up having a very nice 20-minute conversation.
Great.
He says, I respect the fact that you wrote this. He says, I really never envisioned this as wanting to be a musical, and I'm very reluctant to have it go that way. And legally, I'm not going to look at what you sent or what you did.
So
I told him there's a guy also who says, yes, he is you, and sends. So anyway, I gave up. I hung up. And I thought, well, at least that was a very nice, respectful conversation we had with him. And I was sitting there, and I thought, wait, if I got a hold of William Goldman that way, I wonder if I could get a hold of Christopher Monger.
All right, looking up Spielberg. No,
well,
just kidding.
Christopher Monger had written...
He's written The
Englishman.
Yeah.
So I was, in my head, prepping how I was going to get the rights to that. That very night, I just got online, looked in the LA phone book, and found Christopher Monger, and I called him up. And he said, this is like finding out I have, I'm not going to imitate him. He has a strong Welsh accent. And he said, this is like finding out I have a child I didn't know about. And he said, my American lawyers would tell me not to do this.
Yeah.
But send me the child. We'll see what we think of it.
Wow.
So I sent it to him, and he liked what he heard. He gave me the rights to produce we did a workshop of it. It was workshopped in New York. Stephen Schwartz, who wrote Wicked and other things, brought it out to New York. And over a summer, we workshopped it for 2 different presentations. And Christopher Monger's been very patient because initially we got a lot of great response
from the workshop.
And the
workshop was in New York City New York actors.
Across from Lincoln Center, some real actors who work on and off Broadway. This panel was made up of big names. Sheldon Harnick, who wrote Fiddler on the Roof, was one of the panelists. And it was kind of, they don't have a winner, but it was like the piece that got the most acclaim, and Stephen Schwartz brought me out to another event out in Colorado, and Wicked was just taking off. It was going, it was 2004, and it was a great. It was
just
summer
starting to blow up. Yeah, starting to really get.
It would have made sense for me then to move to New York because I think there would have been a lot of doors opening. At the time, I have 6 daughters, and at the time I had 5 of them under the age of like 7.
Yeah.
So it was not easy to make that move.
What was the moral of what do you think the moral is of the story of you calling up William Goldman and Christopher Monger? A lot of people are, myself included, sometimes hesitant to ask the people who you are truly you're curious about to ask a question. Why do you have the sense of, hey, let's just let's just call them. Sometimes it's as simple as that, right?
Yeah.
You wouldn't think it is, but
I think, and it might have been Mark Maron who I think he was talking about it, or someone on his podcast, but he was saying, a certain level of delusion is necessary to do these things. You have to kind of think you are that good, or that's going to work out the way you want it to. That delusion doesn't always help you in the real world, but you have to have a certain level of and then I guess I believe that what I'm creating, not just in that piece, but I think in general, I think I'm trying to create stuff that really is at that level.
Yeah.
So I guess I believe that if I get the door open, that people will go, oh, that's good stuff. And Christopher Munger said send it out, and he did respond in that way.
Yeah, and so now you're to the point where you have a set. I mean, it's a real show.
It's a real show, and so what happened was it got a lot of response, good response. I remember there's a couple big Broadway people who were calling me producers, and
Broadway producers.
What's interesting is they would say, oh, you're the Celtic music guy, because at the time the only other Celtic musical was one called Brigadoon, which is a corny, not very authentically Celtic show.
Yeah, we have a lot of Brigadoon fans who watch this, so you're going to get a lot of hate comments underneath.
And even then I kind of bristled at the fact of being categorized that way. It was like, well,
put in a box,
because that's not my But anyway, there were some producers that were interested. No one really stepped up with enough money to either get the show going or to get me to New York. And for about a year, I was kind of trying to push it in the marketing sense and get a production of it going. And then life just takes over too. You're again a lot of young kids. You're just hustling to keep the wolf from the door. And then eventually my brain starts, I start creating other things as well and thinking we're going to get back to Englishman when life is more ready to do that. And then we jump ahead to the last couple of years. Christopher Munger contacted me, and someone had been asking about a musical theater version. And I'm glad that there was that gap in years, because Broadway's changed. Broadway now has shows that are much more authentically that kind of music. Everything from Billy Elliot, which isn't necessarily Celtic, but it has an authentic flavor. Once is strongly authentic.
From a movie.
And come from away.
Billy Elliot was from a movie too. Yeah.
So I think that we can actually have the music in this is deeper, and I think the writing. I feel like I'm 15 years wiser.
Yeah, and you're also able to recognize through understanding the success of other shows, understanding how to incorporate elements that are still relevant to today's audience. So although the movie came out years ago, that doesn't matter anymore, because what you're creating does still feel authentic. It feels like there's still a message that resonates between the original reference material and the material you've developed for the show.
And I sat down with you a couple of times. You were one of the people that I'd sit down and say, how do we make this better?
Yeah.
And you and I talked about, what's relevant to today's audience? And there are themes, and of course, years go by and life changes and culture changes, but there's things that still are very extremely relevant. There's
a foundation.
There's issues of nationalism. There's issues of colonialism
identity.
in there, national identity.
Yeah.
There's issues of class. There's issues of gender issues that are relevant.
Tradition.
Yeah, that's true too. And let me talk about that as well, because when I did the panel with Stephen Schwartz in New York, so one of the panelists was Sheldon Harnick, and he had written Fiddler on the Roof, and he had said something along the lines of, this is very similar. In some ways, it's almost like the next Fiddler, because it's about a certain kind of ethnic music. It's about a village. The character, one of the biggest characters of the show, is the village itself, and that stuck with me. And when we did the panel, a room of 150, 200 people, and they asked who here has seen a production of Fiddler on the Roof, and everybody raised their hand, and they said, who here has been in a production? Now, it was a room of theater people, but everybody basically raised their hand
at some point in their lives. And
it shows the reach and Fiddler on the Roof, I bet you this year is still being done by 100 community theaters and
probably
schools.
More. Probably more than that too.
Yeah. So when I started delving back into Englishman, one of the thoughts is, how do we create a show that has that longevity, that has that that can be done 50 years from now and still work? And then I was doing again I tend to do a lot of research, and I was watching a couple of different versions of Fiddler on the Roof, and I watched this really bad community theater version. really bad.
You wanted your money back.
No, but what I realized is it still was funny.
Uh-huh.
And I'll guarantee if I was in that audience, and if it was, let's say it was in the middle of wherever, Idaho, some small town.
Yeah. So we also have fans from Idaho,
I don't
and
mean to,
fans that like Brigadoon. So we want to.
No shame to Idaho, but some small town community theater or high school where the most amateurish production of Fiddler on the Roof, I'll bet you, is still enjoyable because the songs are strong. The story is timeless. It's still going to make people think about what is parenting and tradition and I also realized the jokes still work. The jokes work no matter if you can tell a joke or not.
Yeah.
So when I thought about Englishman, I did think, okay, how do I make this
playable in Idaho?
Playable in Idaho.
You know,
how do I have it that even the high school production company that has no real experience or talent, they can do this show and it will still work. And that doesn't mean dumbing it down. It just means being smart enough to make jokes universal, and make jokes that just stick, and make songs that just stick. And still be true to the content. I actually try to really deepen the Welsh ties to it as well, and really not ties, but the strong. It's a story set in Wales, and it's about their pride. Yeah. So I wanted that I wanted it to work in a lot of different ways. If you knew nothing about Wales, you would understand more, and if you were from there, it would move you.
So this is a show, though, with that in mind, this is a show that you are pushing for that higher standard for a Broadway debut. This is something you want to see at that level. Is that the end goal?
I would say that's the end goal of anything I'm doing. That's the poetry book I wrote with I did I'll Write, You Draw, it's called, and I did that with my youngest daughter Francesca, who was quite a young artist when she was 11, and I wrote the poems and she drew the pictures, and it just worked in a really wonderfully magical way. I think you could put that on the shelf along Shel Silverstein, and people would go, "Oh, this is that same level." And again, maybe that's the level of delusion, but I'm writing
every step of the way. There's always been a pull from some sort of top tier success.
Yeah.
And somehow you're able to take a look at what they've done and break it down in a way that seems manageable for you and a team of people to accomplish.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that other than I think movie making is the only one that doesn't really work the same way, but just if I'm writing a poem or a song, I own the same notes and I own the same words as anybody else does. They don't have an advantage over me. I have the ability and the tools to create the best song going, and I have the tools to write the best novel. I own the same words they own. It's not entirely true when you get into movie making, because they just own equipment that I don't have access to. They have access to actors I don't have. But I could write the best script. I could write as good of a script. When it comes to writing, you realize I have the same tools as they have.
Right. So, you've broken down those barriers, and you've said, if they can do it, then I can do it.
Well, I think what happens, and everyone finds they're on their own journey, their own artistic road. But I think sometimes people think, well, I'm here, so I'm only going to write to this level. But they actually own all the same. If you're a writer, you own the same words as anybody else. You can just assemble them. You have the ability and the freedom to assemble it so that it's the next great anything.
But do you not recognize that a certain project like The Englishman has reached a level of being on provided a different opportunity than some of the other projects you worked on? Like this one
without
seems
a doubt.
more viable almost. It seems like this one has a wider door open for you to navigate down. This seems like something that has legs to it. You know what I'm saying?
Without a doubt. Yeah. I think because it's attached to a property that's known, I think that when anything gets known or seen by enough people, that becomes a platform that you can build on. It's a story in a movie that already it's beloved in the UK and Wales. It's known. We got some. We were at the Oregon Historical Society because we borrowed some of their outfits for a filmed reading we did, and the woman there knew it and loved it, instantly. Right. So I think once you are working with a property, that's the value of the property is that it brings a recognition and an affection for it.
So moving forward, I know you touched on this earlier, but is your end game then to be doing this for forever? This is what you're almost setting yourself up to do.
Well, I have very big
move in this
goals
direction
for that musical, and I actually feel like in the next year we're going to actually have it set up to be on a major stage. When I say major, I mean New York, LA. I think it would be great also if we got it to the UK as well.
Some sort of national or international production.
Stage. I think that it's ready for that.
Yeah. And so that's the direction then that you move in. You don't see yourself tomorrow starting a new comic, do you?
I do. No, without a doubt, I do. I do. No, I'd say the opposite. I would say,
we're going to write a country song after this.
I might. I was writing a kid's poem earlier today.
Yeah. But that's all part of it. You're never going to stop doing that. That's just your flow.
It keeps my brain. There's a thing I do first Mondays in Madison here. They have first Monday of each month at the High Noon Saloon. They have a thing called Pandemonium, and you go in, you pick from a jar. They give you a topic. You have about 6 to 10 minutes before you have to get on stage and do 2 minutes worth of straight puns off that. And you can actually go beforehand and find out the topics. I try not to because I actually want my brain. I'm trying to walk that tightrope of figuring on the spot how fast I can keep my brain.
Creatively, you're always moving. Creatively, there's always motion. There's always something in motion, or moving on to the next thing, or continuing this larger project.
Yeah,
there's always an interest in all of that.
And there's a wealth. There's a dozen at least. You and I know we have about 6 movie ideas that are killer.
We've spent a week just writing 3 of them. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
there's stuff
we have
the last
outlines.
Years.
Yeah.
No, it's exciting. It's fun, right?
It's super fun. It's the most fun way to live. I wish I was. What I miss is I do wish I lived in a bigger city that not only from the career aspects but really the community. I think just having a community of people who both do it and then do it at that certain level. That's what's hard.
As a business,
not necessarily a business, but they're at their goals are at that same level. You can talk a language then with them.
Sure.
Yeah.
And you know what? That's today, but tomorrow might be a different story. You know, this may take you across the globe. This Englishman project.
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, it's really exceptional.
Yeah, there's really great things around the corner for sure.
We did a recent staged reading, and the response, people were just moved and excited, and it was A+++ response to it, and I think the material is really ready.
Frank, thanks for being on the show.
Oh, okay, we're done. I'm just getting started.
Creative Side Up is an Edgeline Studios production. Thanks for listening, and we hope you join us again soon.